welcome. My name is Enrique Mendizabal, and welcome to this fourth free webinar of the 2019 On Think Tank School. We will start now with our fourth webinar, hosted by Scarlett Varga from Bruegel. Let me tell you a little bit about the webinar series. Eva, I don't know if you can stop sharing the image so that I can get a better sense of who's out there. Okay. Can you see me?
Yes.
Good. I was just wondering what the screen was looking like. So let me begin thanking Scarlett for joining us. This webinar series is meant to give us a chance to talk to people in the world of think tanks, whether they are funders such as Ruth Levine or service providers like Tom Hashemi, who presented last week from Weir Flint, and who explore the UK public's attitudes toward think tanks. Scarlett is going to talk to us about working in a think tank, specifically around the subject of business development in think tanks. It's something that she leads on. The webinars last about 45 minutes. There will be about 20 minutes of presentation from Scarlett, and then you'll get a chance to ask her questions. Please keep your microphones muted through the webinar. There is a chat box that you can use to ask questions, and I'll be keeping an eye on the chat box so that I can then pass on those questions to Scarlett. If we do run out of time, which I'm sure we will, and your question wasn't answered necessarily, of course we can still join again, come together again online, and continue the conversation. So let me say something very briefly about Scarlett. As I said, she focuses on development at Bruegel. She's deputy head of development at Bruegel, think tanks in Brussels. She's also one of the founders, promoters of the Brussels Binder, which is an excellent initiative to try to promote the role of women in think tanks and in the think tank community. Or rather than the role of women in think tanks, is to recognize the role of women in think tanks in Brussels. At Bruegel, she focuses on relationships with the strategic partners, private foundations, research institutes, and other think tanks. And prior to working at Bruegel, she worked for the renewable energy industry in the solar field, doing research and on industry-led projects. And she has extensive experience working and traveling across Latin America, and she speaks Hungarian, Romanian, English, Spanish, French, and is starting to learn Chinese. So if you want to ask a question in your local language, your own language, I'm sure the chances are high that Scarlett will be able to reply. Now, Scarlett is going to discuss the practicalities of business development in a think tank, addressing questions such as who is in charge of strategic development and fundraising. Is there a one-size-fits-all recipe for most organizations? How to communicate with partners and funders? And she will deal with some of these issues and others in relation to a policy research institute. As I said, if you have any questions, please write them down in the chat box and I will pass them on to Scarlett. I don't think I introduced myself properly. My name is Enrique Mendizabal. I'm the director of Think Tanks, and I will be moderating this fourth webinar. So without further ado, Scarlett, over to you.
Thank you very much, Enrique. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'll keep the headphones on. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for those who call in from another continent. So basically, as Enrique mentioned, my name is Scarlett Varga. I work for Bruegel as Deputy Head of Development. And as you know, or you might know, Bruegel is an economic think tank based in Brussels. So what I will be trying to do in the next 30 minutes, 20, 30 minutes, hopefully not more, is first of all to complement all the amazing webinars that I've been listening to in the past few weeks and the amazing ones that we will see in the future still. So to bring something new, something of my experience. And to reply to some of the questions that I also received during the OTT conference in Geneva and afterwards as a follow-up question. Very brief and very clear questions on what does business development mean in Brussels, in Europe, and what do we do? What is our experience? So I will try to do this in 3 different steps. So I will go a bit through the what, who, and how questions. So I will start a bit with what is business development in think tanks, or how I understand it, how we understand it. Second, who does business development? That's, I guess there's no one reply to that, but I will try to address that. And the third is how we do business development here, and what are maybe some of the tips that I can share, because I saw from the list of participants that some people had, the wish to set up a think tank even, so it would be maybe interesting for them. For others, it might be repetitive, so sorry for that. So the first question, what is this business development in think tanks? And I think that it's important to mention from the beginning that we didn't choose fundraising as a title on purpose. So I do see an important difference between what we mean when we say fundraising and what we mean when we say business models. Funding models are there to help us. They're a tool through which we can achieve our objectives. It is obviously very important that our framework, this funding model that we set as our framework, is an independent one, is a transparent one. So all of us as think tanks, we can really keep the quality of the sector going. Here at Bruegel, we pride ourselves, we hope to pride ourselves with a very stable and very varied, diversified funding model. In a nutshell, basically, we have a very strong core funding base, which is through our membership. And our membership is basically split in 3 big categories. The first category is state members. There we basically work with different governments of the European Union or Europe, and this meaning ministries of finance, economics, research, and so on. These players pay their membership fees based on the GDP of their country and the population of their country. There's a certain percentage there. The second category is institutional members. So these are the central banks of these countries or international development or central banks. So EIB, EBRD, and so on. They have different interests and they work differently. And then we have the group of corporate members. So corporate members usually are international companies who cover the same topics as we do. And they want to be represented also, so they are interested in affairs. So there's a very clear divide between public-private partnerships. Besides, this is already 85% of our budget. And besides this, we have project-based funding. And our research program basically is guiding this relationship that we have with our funders on how we work every year with these stakeholders. So it's important for us, obviously, to keep this transparent, to communicate it to everyone, and to and to respect the research program that is behind it. However, when we think about funding model, this does not necessarily guarantee the quality of the output. This is really just a framework, it's a background. So when it comes to the business model, is really how we create value through incorporating this funding model inside the full system, inside the business model of the whole organization, the mission, vision, and so on, based on which everybody inside the organization works. And I believe that a business development professional has a very big role in driving this, in linking all these departments inside the organization, of course, raising funds, but this can only be done in a sustainable and transparent way if we work together with the different departments and different stakeholders that we have in a very concrete way. So, second question, who does business development, right? So our mantra here in Bruegel is usually to say everybody. Everybody is somewhat responsible for putting the organization out there and representing it. When we have our annual meetings, we often write a special email to everybody in the team and communicate it or remind everybody that you're all ambassadors. They're all ambassadors of our organization, and when they go out, they have to share the achievements and the work that is happening inside Bruegel. For example, when you set up in such an event, when you set up a seating plan, and when you decide who you're going to seat next to whom, that's also a strategic consideration from our side, because those high-level representatives that we often have in our events or in different gatherings, they sometimes take away time from from their families, especially if we talk about the dinner. They travel, they come to meet you, and you want to make sure that that time is worth on both sides. That time is really there to exchange. And I think Ruth mentioned it in the last webinar, how important relationship building is. So, we have to think strategically always behind these kind of outputs and how we use them in a very efficient way. So besides all our ambassadors and all our staff, it depends on organization how much they use their board, but I do believe that the board of an organization represents a very important body that helps with fundraising. Especially when it comes to private foundations, private relations, previous, working relations with different decision makers can really facilitate the conversation between you as a think tank or as an NGO and the high-level representative from other organizations, potential funders. But besides all this, of course, in our setup, Bruegel decided to invest in a development team. So we have a dedicated department in our organization that is specifically dealing with business development, dealing with setting up these relationships, overviewing of what is running in the same time, and really capturing all the net, let's say, defining the net around the organization, so the other representatives can focus on their particular areas of work. And that actually drives me to the third part, to how we do business development. So here, I can share. I'm happy to share a lot of our experience and to reply to the questions that I could get after. I think that it's really about the conversation. There's no one recipe. There are different think tanks and different setups inside think tanks. There are think tanks who choose to do business development on a departmental basis, meaning that everybody who is, let's say, in the migration department, be it fellows or non-research team, everybody is responsible for fundraising. In this case, researchers as well, to set up their projects, they have to go out and find the potential funders. And this is totally fine. It very much depends on what is your internal working about, and what are your, how fast you want to advance in the fundraising strategy, and what is your internal budget, what is the existing budget already. In our case, there is a general message towards our fellows that, although they are there to help, the fundraising side is taken off their shoulders. So they are not, many times we feel even that, it's a bit like with artists, when you speak to a researcher, it's hard for a researcher many times to sell their work, to present it in a way that, ultimately is for money making, let's say, to put it very rough, in a rough term. So we internally, we decided that we go on a different kind of path, and different people deal with this area. Of course, we work in a very close relation with our fellows. We involve them in meetings, we go with them, and but we involve them only at a certain stage, when a certain prospecting stage has been passed and a relationship has been started. So maybe to organize this a bit, I will just share maybe just 5 steps that I usually follow. Of course, this can be more or less depending on the situation. But these are like the main thinking behind how we think about fundraising and what I follow. So the first one is prospecting, right? That prospecting is really about understanding who are those stakeholders out there that have a similar mission as we do, that would like to support the work that we are carrying out, and in general have an interest in similar sectors. Prospecting can happen on many levels, starting from being really active online, meaning registering for the newsletters of all these bodies that you think that you are interested in following and that might become a potential funder one day. following the news, really following the market changes. You know, if you think about corporate members, if the news, you see in the news that there was a merger, two different companies merged, and they decide now to focus on, you know, climate change. They've been in energy business before, but now they really want to go very green, and you know, they need advice or they need input on how European legislation works. There is already, you know, a sign for you to step in. In our case, and this I know it's applied more to the Brussels-based maybe think tanks or European think tanks, but obviously when a certain stakeholder, a certain funder takes the initiative of opening an office in the city where you are based, that's already a very important sign. Or if they invest more money into, you know, European affairs, in our case, that is opening a door towards you being a relevant stakeholder to them without maybe them realizing. So it's really a moment for us to raise the hand and say, we want to open the discussion and we would like to meet. Another maybe interesting hook can be, again, collaboration with colleagues. So we have, of course, our fellows are invited to speak at high-level conferences, very interesting for us. So obviously it's a nice opportunity for us to, you know, sensitize them and just to ask them to, you know, share with us the list of speakers that they met, the interesting people they spoke to, the feedback that they got, business cards that they brought back. And that can be a much easier, you know, way to connect and to start the discussion with the stakeholder than you going and starting from zero. We also do a lot of events here. We have unpaid, so free, open to the public events. So often what we can do is just to analyze a bit who are the stakeholders that are participating, who are interested already in us. They registered for our events. So that's already something that, you know, you can actively do and go and meet them on the spot and open the discussion with them. But this is all about prospecting. It's really understanding, you know, sometimes going beyond the obvious, going beyond those stakeholders that are obviously your partners. Because, you know, in our case, we are an economic think tank. And when it comes to private foundations, for example, that have a very strong philanthropic culture, that they have very, you know, strong social mission, often it's hard to find the right angle from the beginning. So you might miss out if you don't, you know, look at the issue from a different perspective and try to understand and, you know, team up. We are always there to show data, to show the you know, the fact-based research, which then can, you know, go hand in hand with what a social scientist would do or an international affairs professional would do. So I think I mentioned this in the OTT conference as well. I think that Brussels-based think tanks and think tanks in general nowadays realize that however they are specialized and they have their areas, their sectors, it's very important today in today's society, and especially with this fast-paced environment we live in, to understand how to work together, for different, you know, areas to come together, social scientists to work with economists and mathematicians, and depending very much on what the output needs to be. So the second step is relationship building. And I would rather call this turning a logical discussion into an emotional one. And here I agree very much with what Ruth said the other day during the last webinar. You know, it's really fruitful collaborations and fundraising behind that will only happen when, you know, when you find that common objective and that common mission. And sometimes people really put the least effort in really understanding where that overlap happens. Although this is one of the most important parts in building a long-term relationship, because what we want to focus on as well is we put the effort in, so we don't want these relationships to last for 6 months. We want them to go beyond that. So after the relationship is built and nurtured, the next step or the next 2 steps could go hand in hand. So it's value proposition and negotiation. So value proposition, of course, is the moment of your budgeting, when you internally try to understand what is the value that you're offering and what is the cost for your organization and for different members of the organization. It's very important, I think, to understand that, first of all, you need to be realistic. You need to really realistically assess what the costs are, and try to avoid this thinking of, let's be promotional at the beginning, especially if it's the first collaboration. Let's try to, find a smaller budget or something that is more representative, just to be nice. I don't think that this is the right strategy, and I'm happy to, discuss this, because there's no one way. But in my experience, this usually, first of all, just doesn't cover your efforts, which is ultimately not good. And second of all, can really send a message that either you're not committed enough to what you're promising, either your work, the quality of your work will be compromised to a certain extent. So I think that it's really worth, going with the bigger budget or the actual efforts that you are estimating of putting in, than trying to be, a bit more conservative, let's say, which I often see that is the case. And then the fifth step is delivery. Again, a very obvious one. Obviously, when, many times when you have a contract signed already, it can often happen that you get very comfortable. Because you have the relationship built, you have, the agreement on the table, but it's very easy to get too comfortable and to fall back on what the delivery is supposed to look like. So I think that this is really a moment when you have the signature and then you go for it. You really go into, building that relationship to a level where, even if that particular stakeholder or funder will not necessarily go in another project just after that with you, they are instrumental in, recommending your work to other stakeholders, even introducing you to many of their partners. I deal with private foundations a lot, and especially when it comes to private foundations, I think being introduced by another funder, a previous funder, is always a very big added value. Also because they tried your work out already, and of course, it's a different kind of sector. It's a different kind of stakeholder. It's not another think tank. So delivery, really important on the bucket list. And this was my fifth point. So these are the three, let's say, big lines or big thinkings behind how we build this strategy around development. And I think I will stop here, and I'm happy to take any questions, if there are.
Thank you. Thank you, Scarlett. That was very interesting. I have a few questions, and while people join in and ask questions themselves, I will put forward my own questions that have to do with your presentation, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I have a question about independence, which is something that always comes up in these conversations. So how do you ensure that an idea that your researchers have developed, and then you go out and, for lack of a better word, sell to a potential funder, does not lose its, say, intellectual autonomy in the process, right? Because there's negotiation, inevitably, those who say yes to your initial approach are likely to have an objective in mind, right? Even the most altruistic or philanthropic organizations, they are in this because they have an interest. So what things do you do when you present the projects or the ideas and throughout the negotiation to ensure that the intellectual autonomy of the project is not lost in the process? So that's question number one, and I'll let you answer that if you can. I have a few others, but maybe others will join in.
Sure. Sure. Very important question, very interesting question. So first of all, before we engage with any kind of stakeholder, we do a very thorough research about the specific stakeholder. And I call it stakeholder, but I should maybe say funder. So we don't just go into any direction where we see any opportunity for funding. So already at that moment when we, let's say, step into a prospecting stage or into a collaboration, already at that stage, I could say that we identify a certain kind of shared value. I would even call it value. So that's, let's say, at the first stage. The second point is, as I mentioned, we work with private, like with corporations and a lot of stakeholders through our membership. We build a yearly research program, which is basically it's a collaboration between our membership and our fellows. So we have a general assembly each year. We invite all our members around the table. We invite all our fellows around the table. Our fellows prepare and present their ideas on strategic questions and challenges that the next year we are expected to face, or they think we will face in different areas. They present this to our membership and they ask us to contribute and to tell us what they think about it. Because, you know, besides all these conversations, and there are a lot of conversations about independence and how much you lock out the opinions and the influence of a certain stakeholder. But I think that it's very important to find the balance between how much you want to learn from or take over from a stakeholder. Because, you know, sometimes, you know, when we speak to our industry members, for example, when we speak to corporations in general, often you find that they are 10 steps ahead in a lot of thinking in how things are implemented, because often regulation is a bit behind with what is happening on the market. So for us, it's important to learn and to understand, or to hear their voice and to hear their thinking. But what is important is that they don't request anything from us, and that they don't influence the output that our researchers will eventually work on. So in this process, when we listen to these voices, we actually take on board many of the recommendations that we think that make sense to look at. But these are rather questions, these are concerns, these are topics that will be relevant and interesting. And then our director, deputy director, they go back to the drawing board and they bring back a full agenda for a year with topics that we will work on. So that's our guiding principle. Even with the project-based funding that we do from foundations and European institutions, the topics have to fit inside this agenda. So already that's kind of filtered through. There are no replies there. There are rather questions there. Then the output, it's always with the fellow. It's always, whatever whatever position they take, they have the final say on it. So we don't share the final output with the funder, be it like a foundation or a European institution representative, until the last stage really of the delivery. And this is to say, we do not do consultancy work. Some think tanks choose to do it in a certain framework. So in our model, we do not ever take requests from corporations. So we work with corporations through our membership, where they can collectively influence our research agenda, but they cannot come to us with a specific issue and ask us to focus on a specific element of a policy that specifically touches upon what they are doing.
Okay, thank you. There are a few questions, but let me ask you one more, which is a follow-up, and then I'll go to the questions from the participants. Do you ever say no to funding? And do you have, or I mean, maybe you have said no to funding and you have an example, and do you have specific guidelines, explicit guidelines for this? I mean, you've referenced a process and certain criteria, but are there any specific guidelines or criteria that everybody knows that if approached by this type of funder and in this particular way, we have to say no?
Yeah. So there are three obvious ones that we all know. I mean, our team knows, and then there are, we love this formulation, case by case basis. So we always have to analyze each case. We cannot just go for it, which really creates some extra work, but it's all worth it. So the guidelines, the first three, one is what I mentioned. We do not take direct requests from corporations or industry associations, even industry representatives. The second is, when it comes to our membership, we do not welcome on our membership or take any kind of request from, for example, tobacco companies or arm producing companies. So there are certain sectors that are spelled out, let's say. I mean, there's no limitation, let's say. I'm sure that if future others come up, I can add it to this list. But these are the specific ones that actually contacted us in the past, and we always say no. In any case, it doesn't happen so often, so you're not in this situation so often. This is one. The other thing that maybe is interesting to mention is our membership. So because people are usually when they see influenced research, they really think about companies. So it happened before that a certain paper that one of our fellows wrote got one of our members to feel really uncomfortable or not happy, let's say, with the output, and that member stepped out of our membership. This is a risk that we have to assume. It doesn't happen often, which means that we are doing something right, but and we like to have this joint working style, and we want to listen, but the real decision-making power stands with our fellows and with our director. So the quality overview and the editorial process. So none of our stakeholders, either our membership, can influence that directly. And if they try, or if they are not happy with what they hear sometimes, then they are free to step out. And that's something that we need to assume, and that's how we kind of get a quality stamp. And I think that the members who are in, they feel that quality stamp because of that as well.
Scarlett, can you go back to the membership then a little bit, and can you explain where does a membership fit in the organization? What do they offer to the organization? Income, activities, support. What do they get in return? And I think this is a key thing, because for some organizations around the world, the membership also relates to the research itself. So some think tanks are structured more like a sort of a legal firm, right, or an accounting firm, where the researchers are the members, and so they also sit on the, and therefore they would have a say on your research agenda. But from what you say, your membership is different. Can you just briefly tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So our membership does have a say on our research agenda, but a collective say. So they are free to team up if they want. They can form, all energy companies, they can get in contact. And for us, we want to offer this platform where they can get to know each other if they didn't before, and speak to each other, and can put a certain concern forward that they would like us to deal with or research more on. So basically, what they get, so what the membership gets, it really depends on the company, or on not just the company, the stakeholder. So there are mainly 4 membership benefits. One is exactly what we were discussing, the influence on the joint research agenda, which they understand, and it's totally fine for everyone, this practice. The second is exposure in our events. So we have closed door and open door events. There are organizations that prefer closed door events when they can actually meet commissioners, ministers, whatever, in the same room, sit around the table and discuss, openly discuss issues. There are others who would like to be more present and visible on the European stage, and they want to speak at our open events, like public events. Then when it comes to your point on contact with the researchers, of course they do have that. They, once they step into our membership, and, I don't know, Facebook or any other digital or IT company wants to, discuss with our fellows who work on the same issues, digitalization or labor markets affected by digitalization or whatever similar, they can request a meeting with our fellows or with our director. They can come here and they can discuss. They can, have a private viewing, let's say. So I think that it's very important for us to, to communicate that we don't want to isolate, and we don't believe that isolation is, the recipe to independence. We want people to actually come in and tell us many things, and then we want to be able to go back and discuss. We have a weekly research meeting, for example, where all our fellows, research and non-research team meets. And we discuss these concerns. And we reach a conclusion, or mostly that fellow who is responsible for that area or those fellows have to reach a conclusion and have to decide what is the outcome and how the research has to go on. But to us is the influence, is the representation of interests is what the problem can be. But the discussion itself, for that we are open and we are there. We don't see a problem with meeting these people, going to their board meetings and presenting our research to their board, having their representative from their countries coming over and briefing them about what we know.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute my microphone. That's right. I think this addresses at least some part of Jennifer's question about building and nurturing the membership base.
Yeah.
And it resonates with what a lot of think tanks offer their key stakeholders: access, right? Access to a more meaningful conversation with key individuals. There's another practical question about approaching funders without sounding too pushy. And I think you mentioned this in relation to the amount of money you ask. And often we do hear from funders and people who work with funders that say, don't ask for too little, because sometimes not asking enough is harder for the funders. They would like to give you more, and if you ask them for not enough, but from the point of view of somebody's asking for money, asking for a lot of money often feels like you're being too pushy. You're asking for too much. So, do you have any tips on that? Any advice?
Yeah, well, I can be very direct here. I guess that's fine. It happened to me before that I asked for too much, and I've been told, no, it's too much. What do you think? I think that can happen. But what I've learned, and when I started this work, especially, I think it's very different how, as you called it, sales. We don't like this word, but just so everybody understands, sales works in a think tank and how it works in private organizations or any other type of organization. I think it's very important for us to understand, where we stand and how this sector looks from the outside, and we need to kind of also teach others how to look at us. I had a lot of issues with this at the beginning. I had to find a bit the way, the angle to put it, and how will I feel. And of course, it requires a lot of soft skills, and you have to feel when the moment is right, and how the conversation evolves. And still, while I was saying don't be too shy in asking, obviously ask for something that is reasonable and ask for something that is right. I mean, that is really covering your costs, not because we are a non-profit organization, obviously. But I think exactly because we are a non-profit organization, we need to sometimes remind people of that. I really did that recently with somebody who said, we wanted to get on board on a project, and we were told, but this project is supposed, in order to be neutral, this is supposed to be kind of an in-kind contribution from all the partners that would be involved. And I just know that I cannot do that. I cannot justify that internally because we are a non-profit organization. That's what we do. That's how we work. That's the business model behind us. So we need support. There's no shame on that. We need support because we don't make profits that we can invest and then we can, afterwards live on. So I think it's also about owning a bit what you are, and again, a bit, maybe it's similar to the discussion about independence and how people look at it and understand it. There's always different sides of a coin, and you have to understand that just because you are asking for money, it's not begging. It's the type of business model that you accepted. In the moment I decide to work for a nonprofit, I understand what that means and how I have to be regarded in the industry in general. So yeah, that's my personal view.
I'm going to take a question from Annapurna and so change it a little bit, Annapurna. I hope you don't mind, but because you're asking about how receptive and cooperative are researchers to sharing their research analysis or outputs. And I think this works really well for the communication side of things, right? Researchers often feel a bit wary about handing over their research outputs to communicators who then go on and share those findings in different channels. with less and less involvement of the researchers. But how about that when it comes to fundraising or to developing new sort of new income streams? So how receptive are researchers within Bruegel to, in a way, handing over the engagement with the funders or the potential funders to a team that works centrally? Because it's something we've come across as well. So researchers also have their own contacts, and often they don't want to share that with the organization. They'd rather be the ones talking directly to the funder.
Yeah, so in our case, we don't necessarily have that, because from the first moments, usually the contact is driven either by our director, either by us directly, and then we bring the fellow in and introduce the fellow to the funder, which in a way might actually help sometimes, because we start out in a very neutral footing, and then I think that everybody feels more comfortable in, like, I'm interested in you. I heard what you're doing. I'm interested. It's not because I know you. It's because, I heard about you. I heard about the quality of your work. When it comes to, kind of putting the researchers' work out there. So first, just how we know, as I mentioned, we have a weekly research meeting, which is really important for us, especially development team, to attend it, because that's where we get a very good overview on what specific researchers will work on in the next period, and what are really the key questions that we should project outwards that are of interest to us to work on. And these are, of course, captured in the research program, but I'm talking about even more detail, like really what's happening in the news, and then adapting a bit on the long run, what would be interesting to look at. So for us, that's the opening, let's say, and that's a bit lighter to communicate. And when the interest comes then from the funder, then we put the two heads together. Then even from the funder side, again, as Ruth mentioned last time, it's interesting for me to talk to somebody who is more on the business side, and then that person brings their content person in, and then I bring my content person in to the table for the second meeting. And there we have to see whether they can work together and whether they like to work together. Sometimes if it's not the case, then the collaboration can be suspended or it will not eventually take place, because I think that the enthusiasm of the researchers is a very important aspect, which means that we have to try more than we actually maybe achieve. But I think that it's a very organic process, and I think it really proves to be successful.
Okay, I'm going to get another question from the audience before I try to ask my own. Sarah asked something which is interesting. So there's a very clear link between business development and communications. So what do you offer your membership? What do you offer prospective funders? There's a lot of output. It's a lot of opportunities for engagement. For example, a fairly good program of events. So the more you offer in this sense, the more likely they are to give you funding or support. But are there any funders who come along and just provide funding because of who you are? I mean, they're not expecting anything in return, anything tangible. And what are they looking for in that case?
Well, in that case, I mean, in this particular case, I have to disappoint you. There's not such, not in our case. I know that it happens in some think tanks, but I think we also, this is also a consideration for us maybe for the future on how to speak to donors, just donors who just want to come and say, listen, guys, you look great. I think it's great what you're doing. I don't care what you're doing with this money. Just take it and it's good for you. So we don't really have, we don't, at least since I've been here, I cannot say that I've been ever approached with an unrestricted funding or even, very easily given the opportunity to get those funds.
Okay, and conscious of time, because we want to keep these webinars short, and of course, you're all free to contact Scarlett, I'm sure, on Twitter and ask her more questions, or let us know and we'll pass them along. But I have a question. I mean, you're an economics think tank in Brussels. I was at a conference not that long ago in Africa with think tanks across the region, and something that came up quite strongly, and I thought was interesting, was that they felt they were competing not just between each other, but they also felt they were competing with sort of large consultancy firms, McKinsey's, PwC's, and others, who can provide economic research, economic analysis, and advice, and do so with very few caveats to their work. And that's something that government wants, and I'm sure the EU authorities would like to get a clear answer to a question with few caveats. With few, but it depends, right? Or with few, but there are others who say the opposite. So they felt they had to compete with them as well. And they found it hard to differentiate themselves from that type of organization and that type of advice. In your case, what do you guys say to sort of, to differentiate yourselves from this very clear-cut, direct economic advice that might be also in high demand among your main audiences?
Yeah. So what we do, it's interesting, but when you have competitors or you say enemies or whatever, you just want to be friends with them as well sometimes. So what we do, for example, with big consultancies, again, after significant research, so, there are many very valuable consultancies out there that do a great job, and they do work very differently from us. They have a very different, a different pace of working and working style. So we do understand that, we do see the differences. I understand, however, the concerns that you mentioned from the African colleagues, but in our case, what we try to do often is to actually work together with them. We cannot do it openly. So openly in the sense that non-contractually, we do it usually through European funded projects. So we apply together European grants or tenders. There we highlight the commentaries that exist between our organizations. So that would be the easier way, let's say. So, when you cannot really compete or you don't know how to find the edge, then sometimes it's worth working together. And there is where you actually can crystallize how different you are and where you can complement each other. And that is actually, this is a side note, that is actually true also for other competitors, in our case, other economic think tanks that work on similar issues. We sometimes try to work with other think tanks, and it can be a very successful, collaboration, especially if you can share funds or share funding. I have a big funder already that I know and don't have necessarily maybe that big capacity. Then I bring in a partner and together apply for a bigger project through my funder or through the other organizations. That can be an idea. But otherwise, a certain competition, I guess, will always exist, but I would sometimes it's the perception. Once you start working with these organizations, you really understand the different pace that they work at and how they approach things.
Great. Thank you very much. I think there are quite a few other questions out there. I'll kind of read them out loud, read a few out loud. There's a question about, what do you do when you're starting? If you're a new think tank, how do you find a sustainable business model? What do you build? How do you build a sustainable business model? Should your strategies change when you're looking for tied or untied funds? Mm-hmm. Sarah had a question about universities. How to work with universities. If you're a think tank, often, you kind of refer to this a little bit when you want to work with other organizations who might have funding. What is the best way of working with them so that your organization gets paid for its work, right? Although you're a charity, you still have real costs to cover, and often those partners and sometimes even those potential funders don't always understand. I think this is relevant also for working with a state. where the state, where governments might feel, oh, well, you're a charity, you're a think tank, you're here to help us. You could do it for free, right? Somebody else will be paying for this, which is one of the challenges of the think tank business model. Right? You give away your work for free, and then you ask somebody else to pay you for something you've already given away, and that's what makes it quite difficult. Anyway, it was a question about the membership, how to nurture membership, and I think many think tanks who are looking for somewhat unrestricted funding are trying to do this by building and nurturing a membership that will provide some of that, at least small core support that allows them to organize some events or some activities on their own. But I hope some of these questions can continue online, and we can learn more about them from Scarlett. And I'm sure we'll hear more from you as well. And I encourage you to check out our website on thinktanks.org/free-webinars 2019, and you'll find other webinars coming up in the next couple of months before the summer break. We will be hearing from experiences at UNICEF, Forhouse, and the Royal Society of Arts in the UK. So that is it for us. Thank you very much, Scarlett. This webinar has been recorded, so the video will be up soon. And we look forward to seeing you all again. And thank you again, Scarlett. It was nice seeing you again.
Thanks to you. Keep in touch.
You too. Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you.